It is so fantastic to be here. Thank you, Anna. As she said, I am thrilled to be here at the Aspen Institute, where I'm proud to be a Crown Fellow. Anna was my mentor, and taking from the fantastic playwright Adrienne Kennedy, she wrote a book called People Who've Led My Plays, a sort of biography of those who inspired her. So in that version of that book that I will write, Anna is central to who has led my work in that way. Thrilled also to be here with these two guys, visionaries, artists, thinkers, who are really thinking about what the space of art might be. So as Anna said, this track is called Artist as Seer. And I think for many of us, what that means is thinking about how artists are significant in the civic and cultural dialogue. In the title of this panel, we were talking about innovation in art and space, which I know some of you, someone came here because they thought we were going to be talking about outer space. But actually, I realized we're going to get there with you two towards the end. But very specifically, talking about the way in which meaning can be made through thinking about art, where it happens, how it happens, who makes it, and those places that define it. So in thinking about the meaning of space and the politics of place, and the role of the artist, I'm hoping that we might complicate those definitions in talking about both of your work. So I wanted to start and talk out in a very simple way, which might seem obvious, but I think as we have all been a part of a fundamental disruption to the cultural scene. So I want to start with a very simple question, which is to imagine through both of your trajectories, you, Theaster Gates, Chicago-based artist, arts administrator, activist, entrepreneur, potter, I could go on, right? The list. Perry Chen, founder of Kickstarter, but musician, artist, founder of a pioneering gallery in Williamsburg, and also resident New York and New Orleans, so sort of citizen thinking about places. I wanted to start with, just very simply, how we might define, in this moment, the term artist.
Sure.
And Theaster, we can start with you, and then therefore, if you'd like to start with your images, as we talk about that, that would be great.
Sure. All right. You guys, excuse me. I'm gonna move my own images around. This question about what is an artist is actually a really wonderful question to ask right now, because I think that we're in a moment in society when the possibilities of what an artist is, and also the problems that exist outside of the art world that need creative solutions, or people who are thinking in weird ways to think about very, very difficult problems. I'm finding that we don't know how to train those people always, that sometimes people with great solutions, they either come from like the business sphere or they come from a wholly entrepreneurial. But I think that there's a way in which artists also have this way of seeing space, seeing things, seeing people in new ways, and I want to kind of elaborate on that through my work. I was asked to be a part of Documented 13, which is a big exhibition that happens in Kassel, Germany, a kind of nowhere place, not unlike some of the nowhere places in our country. Cleveland could be considered a nowhere place. Baltimore, the south side of Chicago, these places where like maybe they were vast stretches of commerce back in the day, great warehousing places, and then they lost that economic fervor, they lost their mojo, and then they're kind of diminishing. People are thinking about how to kind of reimagine those places. And so I thought maybe this idea of Documenta could be great, where I would leverage the guts of a building in Chicago to restore a building that had been abandoned in Kassel, and not just stop there as a work of art, but then I would bring performance musicians, I would bring actors, I would bring artworks into this space, and we would actually live in this space for the 100 days of Documenta while thousands and thousands of people came through the space. That the problem I had wasn't just how can I put an art object in Documenta Hall in the main museological space, but how could I think about Kassel? How could I think about the 50,000 to 500,000 people that might come through Kassel, Germany? And then how could I take this exceptional experience in Kassel and have that relate to my seemingly nowhere place in Chicago? That is, if these objects go to Kassel and then come back to Chicago, they come back with new meaning and patina. And I was really aware of that, you know, and these are some of the objects that came out of the house. when they came out of the house, they were headed to the dump. And I'm really curious about the way in which artists and the arts can deploy strategies by which they help things become alive again. We engage people to kind of be new people. And these works of art, these things, they can have transformative experiences, not only in the museum, but also in a neighborhood. And so we spent a lot of time taking these gutted materials, caring for them, and it was ultimately those guts that significantly paid for the restoration of this building that had been abandoned for a lot of years on the block. It was the house where deviance happened, lots of different kinds of deviance. But it was really amazing that in a process of about 2 years, the art world was able to expedite an opportunity of transformation if I leveraged it right. And so there was a way in which I could have just thought about the object that fits in the museum, but there was this opportunity to think about a frame much larger. And I think that artists are trying to think about that. Now we call this space Black Cinema House. This is one of the objects that came out of it. It was an old chair with the crown molding that was from the neighborhood, from this building. But I think that these compositions were the beginning of my formal attempt at seeing not only object making, but also the opportunity for other kinds of transformation. I'll stop there.
Fantastic. So tell me, given that you've just described in that short space, but the trajectory from Dorchester Street to Castle, how do you describe yourself?
Right.
Are you an artist? Are you a developer? Are you an entrepreneur? Are
Right.
you a potter? What's the word?
Let's imagine, Thelma, that all of those things are kind of byproducts. They're the kind of outputs of something that feels much more core. Like, I think I'm a believer in transformative acts. I like the moment of creation, and I think that those moments of creation happen when a deal gets done, when I make a pot and it goes from a lump of clay to a beautiful object. The transformation that happens in the kind of Holy Ghost transformations that happen when we start singing a song and we keep singing that song, and then we all find ourselves transforming the space around us because the music is doing a thing, both externally and internally. That I think that at core, I just feel like a creator, and I'll leverage any device necessary to kind of share the idea. And so sometimes the act of creation needs to be the restoration of an abandoned building. Like, that's the best way to use my time. And then other times the act of creation could be the creation of a new song. And that I'm trying to then create the platforms by which I can do all of those things that I believe in while creating without having to choose one or the other.
Right. So, Perry, first let's talk about what led you to thinking about founding Kickstarter. Then I'm going to ask you to talk about what you think it means, having founded this space that creates a platform for artists to make their work, how artists define themselves right now.
All right. Kickstarter, we're 4 years old, but I first had the idea about 11 years ago when I was living in New Orleans. And it's a kind of the classic scratch your own itch project. I was trying to throw a concert down in New Orleans. I talked to the artists, I talked to the venue, and at the end I thought it was going to be too expensive to put on, and so I didn't do it. And it just bothered me. I felt it was really inefficient that I sat in my bedroom and I tried to make the decision where the audience really had no say, and honestly, if I knew the audience was there, I would have taken the plunge. And so I just thought, well, why can't, if we could raise the money for this from the audience and they could get a ticket, then we could do this. And, very quickly I was like, this is a problem I have often, and this is a problem that most people I know have often, especially my creative friends. And that was the genesis of the idea. Hit me again with the second question.
Well, your trajectory to that, though, was through art making yourself.
Oh yeah, I was in New Orleans not to put on concerts, but I was there kind of to escape from New York City, where I left another job, and I had also started an art gallery. And that's kind of interesting because the starting of the art gallery, the renovation of the space, the defining our mission. And the first few shows were what was extremely exciting to me. Then when it was running an art gallery, I the kind of the brain detached a little bit. So I ran to New Orleans to work on music, to focus on music, and I still had that craving to also put on shows for other artists as well. And I think that's the pull a lot of times is like, I want to do my own work, but I want to create venues. And I think Kickstarter also is like, I want to then create a platform for other artists and other creative people to help them solve their problems. I think sometimes I stop myself because, Kickstarter keeps me very busy, but I want to get back to doing more of my own work. And I see myself being pulled off into ideas that are creating platforms that I want, but actually will end up with me spending all of my time working on a platform and then less on the work. So I've have to learn how to be careful.
Right, but let's just talk about the platform you've created for a moment in terms of what it means for artists. So this is, I'm sure some of you have heard this, but I think it's worth repeating over and over. So far, $650 million to artists for projects. 10% of the entries at Tribeca, Sundance, and South by Southwest began with Kickstarter funding. 10 Academy Award nominations and 1 Oscar to a Kickstarter project, and works of art that have been shown in the Whitney Biennial, Museum of Modern Art, the Walker Art Center, and the Studio Museum in Harlem.
Right on.
Right?
Right on.
Fantastic. No, amazing. Amazing. So both of you, this idea of a platform is another way to talk about creating space. And in both cases, you created spaces that didn't exist. Other than the impetus in both cases to create a space for yourself, what do you think that means about the current structure of institutions, artists, and patronage when artists sort of create spaces for themselves? I mean, this has always happened, but in this particular moment, both of you are really representing different options and ideas of how to do this.
Well, in a sense, I know we're trying to pull back from labels, but I'll use them to just jump in.
Yeah.
So, obviously there's the artistic side and then there's the entrepreneurial side. And I think that, as we're in a time where we see just a tremendous amount of need for space, for creative people, and then a tremendous amount of opportunity, these new tools like the web, to create spaces, it's almost, at least for us, I believe, impossible to kind of not try to create it when you see that opportunity, because even though it's often not just for ourselves, it's for other people, you're seeing yourself as the person you're creating it for. And when you see other people get to use it, it's that joy in seeing them kind of use that space that you created, even if it's not you every time.
Well, Perry, I think you're also kind of sidestepping one important part, which is there are ways in which the problems that we see in, say, our artistic peers, their need for a studio space, or their need for a gallery opportunity, or their need for the resources, that everybody else sees that. The philanthropic community sees it, private collectors see it, lots of people see it. But because we've also experienced it and embodied it, there's a way in which the problem of space feels very urgent to me. So when one of my guys or one of my female friends comes and says, I'm going to have to give up my studio, I have immediate empathy for that. And I think that it's this combination of empathy plus entrepreneurial practice that is okay, how can we solve this problem that doesn't kill me, but creates new opportunity? And so where Perry is approaching the problem from a kind of virtual space and saying that crowdsourcing or the resource side is something that is actually quite democratic, and your $5 can do a whole lot. I'm approaching it from the kind of physical space side and saying, man, if there's a way that we can anchor these spaces around the country, around the world, where artists can have more time, artists who went to grad school can have more time after grad school to incubate, or artists who have never been to school could be alongside folk in the kind of intellectual hub and creative engagement and rigor that happens from peers saying no to each other and saying, I don't believe in that, where the practices grow, that I think that the platform construction feels like it almost, even though this might get usurped by a particular kind of neutral entrepreneur, it's born out of folk that have sympathy and empathy toward our peers.
And I just quickly, I think, it's not just because you can easily recognize the problem and sympathize with somebody in that situation because you know exactly how it is. I think it's also that when you're solving a problem that you're extremely familiar with, you're able to come up with solutions and very quickly know if it's the right one, because you're like, if that would have worked for me, then that's the right one,
Right.
which is that type of problem solving, I think always comes up with the best solutions.
The other piece, Dom, is that I don't want to do stuff by myself. Like, I remember reading the stuff about Rauschenberg, like there are these moments where in the creative practice, there's room for others in the practice. And so as you're scratching your own itch, you might be able to scratch like 50 backs at the same time. So it's like, oh, well, I could either get this building or I could get this other building. And if I get this other building, then it means that other people can also use that building. You know what I mean? It's like if I figure out a way to crowdsource for myself, I could crack the nut on crowdsourcing. And so it's like, it points to this idea that studio practice, which had been solitary and isolated, has the potential to be not that. It has the potential to consider others in lots of different ways. And again, not as some kind of like choice do-gooderism necessarily, but just like I'm really interested in the things that happen outside of my studio in my neighborhood as much as I am inside my studio.
I think that it's, because the original intent is to help solve the problem for other artists, and then you're starting to see, well, if everybody's in the same space, this kind of cross-pollination will lead to even better things. And I think that's almost how it starts to happen. You're starting to solve problems through empathy and understanding, and then as you're putting unique solutions together, you're starting to see how they actually, fourfold, fivefold, tenfold the effect that they can have as you're going through the process, not necessarily at the beginning. I think what we have project creators on Kickstarter say to us over and over is, clearly I came here to get the funds for my project. What I did not anticipate was what the community of backers around my project was going to mean to me. And we hear this over and over and over and over, how it's been this wind at their sails when they're going forward and working on their projects. Because I think traditionally it's been more of the creator is in they do their work in their studio and they have a small group of people that see it, and then there's, whether you're a writer or whether you're a painter, there's the reveal. On Kickstarter, people are joining these projects as backers early on in the process, and they're getting updates as it unfolds. And they're not consumers that are coming there on day one. They're these patrons, and that really, we've seen, has really helped the artists not just have this confidence that when I bring it out, these people want to see it. These people want to see it in a very supportive way. They're not there to give their harshest judgment. They're like, this is the thing we all brought into the world together.
So that's the space of creating community, as you say, around the projects or in a particular space. So I'm going to ask both of you, all things being equal, what is it that artists need most to make significant work?
What I found very useful in my career, there were these moments when I felt extremely isolated, and that the work that I made had not only no value, but there were no people interested in it. And every once in a while, you'd win an award. Like I won an Artadia award. It's a $5,000 award. But like these curators came to visit, they came to my studio, they offered me a very rigorous critique, and then they were a platform, and they were like, hey, Chicago, there's this dude you guys don't know about, but his name's Theaster, and he's doing stuff, and we're gonna acknowledge him. And that award, and then there was like a Joyce Foundation grant where they gave $50,000 toward a project. And it was like these moments where you dot along people and organizations that kind of value what you do and find ways to celebrate it. And then there were individuals who had kind of said, hey, you're weird, you're kind of interesting, we'd love to have you over for dinner, you can meet our friends. And then those dinners at
all
the dinner,
laughing.
they're like Maryland, but and you go to this dinner and then everybody else is like, oh wow, you're weird. And you leave those dinners sometimes thinking, God, I felt like the monkey in the room.
Right.
But other times you leave those dinners feeling like, wow, this person wanted to come by my studio. They were really interested in what I was talking about. Man, I should think about, you know what I mean? And so I think that it's actually a very human thing of acknowledgement. they ain't really about the money, but it's like, how do we encourage creative people who are already at the margins of culture, and in a moment where like wealth and economy and your ability to kind of capitalize and monetize everything is the thing that seems to be the highest virtue, how do you say, being a creative person is really important. We believe in that. We want to support that. And I think that that becomes enough to be the pebbles and stepping stones that allow us to have more successful careers over time.
And Perry, what have the projects on Kickstarter taught you about what artists need? I mean, you've said that people come away from it feeling the value of community, but what, I mean, because you have a very unique view right now of sort of not just this initial point of inspiration that people have, but the initiative that they're going to take to make it happen. What do they need to make that happen?
You know, obviously we deal a lot with money, so that's, and there's no denying that. So putting
But
that
we're
aside.
going to talk about money.
Yeah,
in a
putting
minute.
that aside, you know, I don't know if it's the most important thing, but to know where the work is going. You know, when you're working on something and you don't know if anybody's going to see it, you don't know where it might go. Certainly artists often power through those situations, but to be able to know it's going to go somewhere where you're going to be able to share it and show it, it could be modest. I mean, it's just not that I'm making this and this may never leave this room. I think that I don't know how to fully solve that problem. I think, you know, we're working a lot in solving that problem for the people by creating that initial community, which that is often enough, but in general, even outside of Kickstarter, I think that that's something artists need.
Yeah. Esther, how do you sort of reconcile this role of being an artist in the world, speaking for your work and speaking for others, and actually the making of things? How do those two things sit next to each other?
Well, it's interesting. I think that I took my cues from a lot of people in this audience. That there are people here who might imagine themselves compartmentalized, and they say, okay, in my day job, I'm a minerals trader. And being a minerals trader allows me to do these things that I actually feel really passionate about. And I'm really passionate about young people in education and building stuff. And so this one helps me to do the other. Well, in my case, I feel like that's conflated even a little bit more. That is, there's a way in which the art practice itself seems more compelling because it has more to do than just be an object on display. And that the parts of my brain that, if I were born of just an MFA, I would probably think very differently about this. That I would probably reflect on the history of art, the history of studio practices, but because my disciplinary training also included like thinking about the problems of the city or thinking about where faith and spirituality has an impact, and then even me having a critique of the church and religious structures and asking, okay, if these formal institutions of power aren't doing the real work, if the political leadership local to a place isn't doing the work, if the mayoral or presidential climate never seems to like have heat that benefits the people who live around me, then is there a way that through this practice, not only the creation of an object, which is important, could happen, but also maybe the creation of a library or the creation of a venue space or the creation of an investment fund that thinks about more artists and more spaces. And that all of that seems part and parcel to a complicated dude, you know, and so that I don't imagine myself like, oh, in the daytime I make art and at night I give my money away to support some cause. I'm like, the problems of my world are big problems, and I'm going to solve them all with one stone. And so the excitement is to figure out how to make the most articulate throw so that when it goes out into the world, it's like, pop, pop, pop. Right. And then you can like hit these things on multiple levels.
So let's talk about money.
I like that.
Right, exactly. Let's talk about money for a moment, because both of you, in relation to the practice of art and the making of art, have created some transparency, right, around the space of commerce. And in your case, it was the fundamental belief that with the initiation of these projects, giving them a platform for artists, that they would be able to find their audience who would support it. and support it in a way that could make it happen. Where in that, I mean, often you talk about this intersection of sort of like patronage and commerce. Can you talk a little bit about that as it relates to how artists can imagine their work?
Yeah, on Kickstarter, artists and creative people put up their creative projects, and they're looking for funding, but they also offer what we call rewards. So it might be a copy of a limited edition, an invitation to the opening, dinner. It's really up to them, and people come up with really amazing things. I'll tell the quick Alexander Pope story because I think it's a great context. Yeah. In doing research recently about the history of this, because I think we all know about the church and large patrons, the Medici family, but there was actually a history of large numbers of donors supporting artists in single works. So we found out recently that Alexander Pope had 750 subscribers, which were backers, for his project to translate the Iliad from Greek to English. And their names were inscribed in the first edition of the book. And so in many ways, Kickstarter is taking that and pouring the internet on top of it. So get me back on track.
So really,
I'm like 500. I'm going hundreds of years ago.
Right, but now back to right now. So right now,
where am I?
Right now, you're creating that same opportunity for artists. But what essentially do you think, as Kickstarter goes along, that will do to the making of art and the opportunities for artists?
I think it's just more. It's just more stuff happening. I mean, one of the things we're happiest to serve was that a tremendous amount of art and creative work is not built to make money. Maybe has no chance to make money, or maybe that the artist at the beginning is not thinking about making money. And so we've been able to bring people together where the expectation is not that this work is going to go out and make money and that the backers are going to receive a piece of that. So people aren't judging these projects on, how will this do in the market? They're saying, do I like this person? Do I like what they're trying to bring into the world? Do I want to be a part of it? And that's a much, much lower bar, and that's really important that things can be judged outside of the prism of the marketplace. I think the market is fine, but you need to serve the other 99% of things that don't fit as well into that. And as we were talking earlier, that was obviously a big question people had before we launched. Will people support things where they don't get a piece of the action? What if the album goes to number one? We had an album that not number one, but
number 10.
Number 10 that debuted on Billboard. Nobody was like, where's my piece? I think people from the beginning understood and were happy to get what they got, and they were thrilled for the artist when they debuted there. And then I think a little bit on the other side, there was the question of, well, is this tax deductible? And if not, will people give? And very few projects on Kickstarter are tax deductible if the project creator is working through a 501c3 it is, but it's really like 1% of the time. And we haven't seen it be friction at all. We've seen that people are really happy to support these projects, and they're not really thinking about the benefit to them other than supporting this work and getting the reward that was proposed to them.
And Theaster, with a current project of yours, you've really kind of turned this on its head. So can you talk a little bit about your bank project and your bonds, the sort of currency you're creating?
Okay, let's see if we can pull up an image. Okay, so about less than a year ago, it was announced that the city was going to tear down this pretty historic terracotta building in my neighborhood. It's about 2.5 blocks away from where I live. Because the parapets were bad and they were afraid that something might fall and hit somebody and they would sue the city. I asked the city if they would consider allowing me to become the caretaker of this bank. The mayor said, yeah, how are you going to finance it? And I was like, I can finance it. And by the time, it'll take you guys 3 years of red tape to figure it out. And by the time I can figure it out. But this is also in this moment where I'm thinking about these multiple platforms. And so in my practice, since I salvage things, I glean things, I try to make these really specific narratives about urban space. I try to turn those into universal narratives about the problem of the city, the disinvestment that's happened in some poor places, and how some places shrink while other places grow. So I thought, man, this bank would be the right kind of big problem. It's the biggest problem I've ever tried to solve. It's 3 blocks from Dorchester. I was like, and it's the only commercial space on the main street. I'm so sorry that I didn't turn my Outlook off, you guys. It's really embarrassing.
Oh, sorry. Oh my God.
It's like, oh, Barbara Kennan. Oh God, I gotta call Barbara. Sorry, Barbara, I'm gonna call you, I promise. And so a couple things happened. One, I wouldn't have been able to think about, the city wanted me to immediately put scaffolding up, this crazy stuff. And it was like lots of money to do that. So I found out that there had been 17 deals before me by developers who wanted to kickstart the redevelopment of Stony Island, but they didn't because the numbers didn't work. And so what I realized was that, this is this moment where I could function as a developer believer in the building, believer in the neighborhood, and that it takes something in addition to one's capacity to restore a building in order to be willing to spend the resource necessary. Long story short, Basel invited me to do a project at Basel Unlimited. This is the exhibition part of Basel, Switzerland, where an artist can do a project. The bank had fallen into such disrepair because there were 2 skylights in the bank. Some people had taken the skylights off to get to the copper pipes. And, you guys know this stuff. The last currency in the bank that could be hauled out, right? And so I redesigned the roof of the bank, created this tarred roof, the 2 fenestrations. And then with the marble that existed in the bank, I created a small bank bond. The bank bond was worth $5,000. It's like your return. And we were gonna make 100 of them for Basel. We would sell them only at Basel. And so we had Basel, which is an art fair, which also had Basel Unlimited, which was the exhibition non-selling part of the fair. Then we had the fair, and then we had my bank bond, which my gallery in London said, we believe in the project with you, so we won't take a percentage of cut so that you can get the $500,000 necessary to kind of get you started up. And so there I was, kind of able to leverage the fair to do this thing that exists alongside the fair in order to get $500,000 of the $3.5 million necessary. But then something else happened. And I want to talk about how multiple platforms are necessary, because while Perry is able to help people who have work that may not become legible to the art market, I'm absolutely banking on the fact that the art market believes in the work that I do, and they're like co-conspirators with me. And this is like my version of a kind of crowdsourcing. So I said, well, Gallery 1 and 2, are you guys willing, if this narrative, once this bank is done, it's gonna be the freaking hottest thing in Chicago. And then as a result, the works that y'all sell in y'all galleries are gonna become more valuable because there's gonna be fewer of them because I'm gonna be tired. I need you guys to invest with me in this bank because the narrative of the bank is gonna increase the value of the objects. Now we're talking Guns N' Roses.
Right.
And to do that, I need you guys to commit 1.5 million of the 3.5 toward this bank, which means that there'll be a set of works that you won't take a cut on, not just for the $500,000, but for an additional $1 million. And the only way that this could happen is if the private world is invested with me in this project. And the only way that the private world will want to see Stony Island Bank restored is if they either believe in Theaster, or they like their bank bond, or they know that as a result of all of this good work, that one day the things that they've invested in will have more value. And I've had to become almost kind of brutally harsh with myself to accept that there's a complex relationship between people who buy works of art because they believe in the work, they believe in beauty, and they believe in investment.
So jump ahead 4 years. What will this bank be? Tell us exactly what it's going to be like when this is all done.
Dorchester will be Black Marfa.
Okay, all right. You heard it
You
here.
all
Okay.
will be, you'll be at Aspen Ideas Fest, Stony Island.
Right.
And we'll be kicking it in the bank next to the Johnson Library and Archive.
Fantastic. fantastic. Perry, you...
Should I talk about the bank that I'm restoring?
Exactly. No, Perry, you've spoken a bit to me about this idea of multidisciplinary. How artists work across disciplines now and the ability to do that, speaking to the conditions of this moment. Can you talk a little bit about your feelings about what that means and what that says about being an artist or a creative individual, or even how we, again, use these words?
There's a lot of ways I could go with this, and we've had a lot of great conversations this week. I think what I'd love to touch on at this moment is identity. I think that one thing that I talk about a lot with Kickstarter, and I wasn't thinking this is what I was going to talk about, but is how we have this convergence of things that are leading us to this moment of creative explosion, and the web is a huge part of that because people can learn how to do things and get tools. To make an album used to be unbelievably expensive, and now, with your laptop, but a big part of that creative explosion is not just the tools or the time, which we might have less of. It's also the fact that people, regardless of the fact whether they label themselves artists, whether they have full time to put to their practice, I think people who have often always been, a minerals trader and then also been in a band, have kind of gone from saying, at least our generation, from, oh yeah, I'm in a band, but whatever, to, yes, I'm a trader and I'm also a musician, and embracing that part of their identity. I think society has accepted it more. I think people are doing it more. So there's been this really great feedback loop. I think that's a huge part of it. And with embracing that identity, you're almost, unless you're a full-time artist, you're starting as multidisciplinary, right? You're very often it's career and so in a sense that's unlocking, well, if you have two, then why not three? And then even for the full-time career practitioner, I think what D'Aster is illustrating with a lot of what he's talking about is that you sometimes cannot help yourself. Right. He's walking by and he's like, there's the bank. He's like, I got to do something with this bank. And I think we're at a time now where it's the opportunity and the ease to do things and to understand that you can do things is incredible. To be a filmmaker, to be a visual, a visual artist. And so I see people embracing this thing. I like to look at it as a kind of a resurgence of the Renaissance perspective. And I don't know if that's academically correct, but I feel that kind of happening with our generation and younger generations.
And I think for many of us, we are sort of inspired, challenged, energized by the complexity that comes from people occupying these different roles in the space of them being artists.
And I think, in a sense, like, business maybe is the final frontier, right. Or maybe, science after that. But like, in a way, these things are so adjacent. So it's you're a sculptor, you're a filmmaker. It was a big leap for a while. Now it's it makes sense. But now, with things that D'Aster is doing, you're challenging even another frontier. Okay, let's go.
But Perry, but I think there's also like I was on the edge of that generation where people would say, pick a thing and do it well.
Wow.
I heard that on one side, and then my dad would say, always have a skill, always have a trade.
Yeah.
Like, you pick a thing and do it well, and just in case they fire you, you better have this other thing that can continue to put bread on the table. And so I feel like people have always done many things, but it was not always accepted in a kind of an Americanness that you would talk about those things because it would make you seem scattered. It would make it seem like you're messy. Like and so there's a kind of, I feel like, there might
Jack
be
of all trades, master of none.
Dilettante. Like there's a kind of rationale that suggests there's no way that anybody could be really good if they think they're doing four things. Right. And it's like, well, what really good means is complicated. And how multiple things inform the one really good end product as a result of you knowing a little bit about music and a little bit about video, you're gonna make a much more sexy music video than if you only knew music. You know what I mean?
So opening up the space for your creative practice. I want to open it up actually right now for some questions. While we have a few moments, there are microphones. I'm supposed to point you all out, but I can't see. Yeah, anything. Oh, there you all are. Okay, fantastic. Yes, right here. No, she's going to run over and you're going to stand up. Well, you don't have to, so she can see you, Larry, just so we can get you the mic.
Congratulations first on a great panel. You guys have a lot of energy, and a lot of passion. So it takes a village, and working together and paying it forward. You guys have activated spaces and ideas. I guess what I want to get from you guys is, I know you met in Davos and shared ideas there. So as artists in spaces like the Aspen Ideas Festivals in Davos, which is not necessarily an art forum, what have you guys gained from these experiences presenting yourselves to people and taking away from that?
Well, I mean, the clearest one is that, Fiestra and I met in January in Davos. We've become great friends. He's visited my spaces in New York. I've come out and visited his spaces in Chicago. And as all you know from being here this week, and probably many, many more of these, that exchange, that meeting people can be just as, if not more important than the content that's on stage. The content maybe helps get the conversation started. So even if that's all that comes out of the conferences, I think it's important. Bringing in art that maybe have been less of the program in a lot of these events, I think it's just bringing in kind of more diversity into the space. And I think artists meet enough artists in their regular life. They're happy to really want to meet people in other disciplines and kind of see the commonalities and get informed from each other. So the mix is really good, and I think the programs are getting stronger. Over the last few years as art is becoming less of a kind of let's just throw it in and more a part of the dedicated and well thought out program.
Yeah. And maybe Larry, I want more. I actually do these for really conniving and strategic reasons. I feel like all three of us have institutions that in one way or another are on the ground and attempting to do stuff. And that the beauty of Aspen is that it's a moment where everybody can kind of be quiet and private and talk about things in a little bit of a bubble. And that there's a moment now where there's like a straw that can enter that bubble and function as a kind of conduit. And I want you guys to feel as passionately as we do about the arts, about what happens to a person, not just the world famous genius artists, but all of those artists that are on the ground, that like you guys are part of what shapes cultures in the cities where you have your first homes, if Aspen is your second home. And so it's really also an opportunity for us to like act as conduits or mediums or prophets to say, if you're from Cleveland, go back and do way more than you're doing right now, because Cleveland needs us all, Baltimore, Detroit, Chicago needs us all, Harlem needs us on 125th Street. It's a really great platform where the things that we believe in, this is another platform where we could share those things openly and earnestly and then see, man, is there a way that we can partner to do more things in space?
Okay. The question right there in the middle. The microphone. Can you raise your, yeah. Raise your hand again. Yeah, thank you.
That was a great panel. My question is for Perry, I think, more. My friends who've done Kickstarters, project creators, usually $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, small products, getting them off the ground. I wanted to know, with the Veronica Mars project that raised $2 million with Warner Brothers, what are your feelings on more commercial projects, being no equity where they're getting all the upside, big actors?
I mean, money? I think, honestly, whether it's a $500 project, a $10,000 project, or the $2 million project, I think we approach them the same. And honestly, we think about them the same. It is one new creative work that's being put into the world. I think, having seen some few larger projects come out this year, especially filmmakers, people are asking, is this something completely new into the system? I really don't think it is. The people that are supporting those larger projects, they know from the outset that they're not doing that to get a piece of it. They're doing it to bring this to life. A lot of those people were fans of the TV show. In that case, the film was not going to get made without their support. And actually, the head of my community team was a huge fan, and then she just flew out to be a walk-on extra, and she's like over the moon. These backers are thrilled, and I think it kind of reminds us that sometimes the things that we think are the triggers, like the tax deduction or the potential upside, are not as big of factors to people, because we don't change new behavior. I don't think Twitter created new behavior. It kind of reduced friction and a reduced cost. And I think we're dealing with the same thing. We didn't create new behavior where people want to now support each other to bring creative works to life. People have always wanted to do this. we were removing costs and we were removing friction for this to happen. And I think whether it's a small project or a large project, I think it's the same model.
Great. Thanks, Barry. Let me go over here. Are there any questions? I don't want to ignore this side of the room. In the very back. Then I'll come over.
Just out of curiosity, what do you think this discussion could mean for the large art institutions in the United States? Because there are obviously lots of institutions that are not only into showing art, but also collaborating with artists. Is there anything they could learn from what you've learned?
You guys are turning to me. You know, from where I sit as the curator and director of a small institution, I think we are doing the critical R&D for large institutions. In many ways, our model is to be sort of at the edge of sort of thinking in real time with artists, with creators, to create an environment that redefines the space of what we might call a museum or a gallery or an institution. So I think it can be a collaborative relationship if we sort of understand our roles in really exact ways. And I think those of us who embrace our role to kind of be there doing that work, it makes it productive for all involved.
If I can respond to this too. The words high and low come to me, that I think that for the large institutions that have the burden of a large funding nut every year to make the thing work, that there's a certain amount of cultivation that happens at the very high level. And maybe you imagine that the high level are the people who can fund and the low level are the users. But one of the things that I've learned with Kickstarter and with some of the projects that I'm doing with other artists is that what we imagine as high and low, really that there's room, if we're generous to the low, that the low can be as generous back. And so figuring out models within our structure to not only imagine the person that comes to the museum as a walking patron and that's all they're good for, but starting to really ask questions about these folk that come in and say, what can these communities do for their museum? You know, and in the same way that we have strategy at a very high level, if we give some of that demonstrated strategy to these things, I imagine that museums could see a lot more of themselves and of the way their spaces are activated.
Definitely. We're here, yes. The mic's coming to you.
Bonds sell out, or are they still available to support the project?
I think we should talk about if they're still
I'm not
available, how
sure.
much they are.
Right.
That's really the key.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about bonds is that for people who are smart investors, they try to buy them all so that they can kind of manage the market. And so what I've found is that there's this kind of interesting fight that's happening once people were sure that the bond, I'm not sure how many bonds might be left. We can talk about it later.
I see. Heidi, could someone give the mic to Heidi? Thank you.
So, Theaster, I have a question for you. You talked about being upfront about the relationship between supporting your work and then what the money's used for, and the sort of complicitness then of the collectors of your work. I'm curious, how much do your dealers talk about that with the people that are buying the work? How important is that to you? And what percentage, not a number, but of people do you think are involved in that practice with you?
Okay, real deal. It's a couple things. People buy art for lots of different reasons. I think that some people buy art because they really want to believe that they believe in beautiful things, but in their own way, they want to make a change. And the make a change part is complicated to measure. But if you have an artist who's making a change and you're able to invest in an object, you really believe that you're part of that change making in a way. I've tried really hard over the last couple years not to conflate those things. That is, buy the work because you believe in the work, and the change that I'm making is what I do with my money, ain't none of your business, in a way. But if you have interest in these kinds of things, they're really a big part of what I think about. I'm really the chairman of a not-for-profit that I really believe in. And if there's some other partnerships besides you buying a work of art, and you want to learn more about Dorchester, I'm happy to share with you. And so, and I feel like I've learned that model from lots of different other kinds of people who are both the manager of hedge funds and the chairman of boards that they start because they believe in a thing. And so I think that one of the things that I'm trying to tease out is not to have it so that the work is dependent upon the narrative, but that the narrative informs the work like all narratives inform good works of art.
Great. I think we have time for one more question, and we're going to go
Thank you.
all the way. Thank you. Thank you, Dennis.
Thelma, recently the Louvre acquired a 16th century painting through the efforts of 5,000 French citizens. I'm wondering if you would ever consider a Kickstarter campaign for a Mark Bradford painting or a Lorna Simpson piece or something like that that would change the museum and allow it to collect more for the permanent collection.
Sure, Dennis, you know me well enough to know that I am open to all fundraising strategies. I mean, Perry can take out, we can do one right now. If anyone wants to
We don't
be a
even need
part
the
of it.
computer,
That's
right?
right, we can do it right now. No, certainly, certainly. You know, look, all of these strategies, you know, really are ones that we are also learning from, right? Those of us who've been involved with traditional philanthropic methods, you know, crowdsourcing really has been informed. But some of us come out of that. I mean, working in Harlem, you know, crowdsourcing is what the churches have always done, right? They need a roof. They say on Sunday, it's the roof fund. And they pass it around, like right now, I could pass a little plate around and everyone would put something in, and that would be the way in which that community of people would say, we want to make sure the roof is not leaking anymore. So some of these ideas also have sort of places that can be enacted in new ways within the context of our cultural institutions. So yes, I would. That's a definitive yes, I would.
You know, one last thing is that what I find often is that when there's a lot of people talking about new things, new innovations, you can almost always look back and see that this was done before. And the internet is accelerating it, is opening it up in new ways, is adding amazing new dimensions. But we've figured out a lot of these problems before. And sometimes it's helpful, it's easy to say, looking to the past and looking to how we can transform a model that had worked very effectively before and kind of bring it back in.
And bring it in. I want to thank Perry and Theaster for being so amazing, brilliant, and generous today here. Thank Anna and the Aspen Institute Ideas Festival for inviting us, and thank all of you for coming. Thank you.